All right, class. So what I'm going to be demoing right now is how to deoxidize and prepare your aluminum litho plate. So I've got a plate that's already been prepared, and you'll notice that there's a lighter color of gray in the middle, and that's actually the area where I'm going to draw. And this is just border that's been painted on, that's just gum arabic and a little bit of tannic acid solution. And what that does is that protects this part of the plate, so I can touch it, I can rest my hands on it. This lighter area in the center is actually really receptive to grease, and that's going to be what we draw with as a grease crayon or grease pencil. So anything with oils, like your skin, especially if you're using hand lotion with oil in it, there's all these things that can print later on that you touch that you can't, that touch the plate that you can't see. On the opposite side, saliva, some kinds of water have a slight acidity. Those will actually etch the plate before you draw on them sometimes, and so you'll have these little white specks or dots that show up. There are ways to do that on purpose with a little bit of gum and a toothbrush. You have the opposite with a little bit of grease and a toothbrush to sort of spritz over it. As ways to make kind of like, speckles or whatever. But, to start with a fresh plate, I want to, get my plate from Allard's, from the art store, or order it online. Oh, come wrapped. Sometimes they have this top sheet. It's just a thin sheet of paper. And so what I want to do is I want to deoxidize this plate, which is, in other words, to wash off all the oxidation that's built up while it's been stored. So sometimes the plates get a little bit of air and moisture on them, and it creates a really fine, thin coating of oxidation that you draw on top of, and then you go to etch your plate, and your drawing just lifts right off because the oxidation is there as a resist to the grease, and so it doesn't let the grease actually stick to the plate. So to avoid that, I want to wash the plate with hot water. That works by itself. Here in the studio, we use a little bit of citric acid to make sure it's like strong enough and really, gets that oxidation off pretty quickly. But I'm going to do it 3 times. So essentially I'm going to apply hot water. I'm going to wipe down the plate. I'm going to reapply hot water, wipe down the plate. And like I said, I'll do that 3 times. And then the final time that it's rinsed off, I want to make sure I blot it completely dry. Because if I let the water on it dry of its own accord or in its own time, it will just leave more oxidation. And also, our water is pretty hard here. So some of those minerals and nitrates that are in the water will actually create weird textures or patterns that I can't see until I go to print. So I want to make sure that I deoxidize it thoroughly and then dry it off completely. And then I'll prepare the border with some gum arabic. So some of this might be hard to do at home. You should be able to deoxidize the plate with hot water. You could maybe use acid-free tape to create borders like I have with gum. Or you can wait until you're in the shop, which is why I'm filming this tutorial in the studio so that you know how to do this in the studio when we are back on campus. All right, so to do this process, I want paper towels, either Viva brand or the blue shop towels they sell at hardware stores. And then I also want some pretty sturdy utility trimmers, which are here in the shop, just on the shelf next to the area where I'm set up doing this demo. So I want these because I want to kind of round the corners. The corners tend to be really sharp and unforgiving, so they'll tear the paper towels. Sometimes people will cut their hands on them. I don't need perfectly rounded corners, but I want to take a little bit off of there. And you'll notice, again, I'm not touching the surface with my finger. I'm kind of just handling the very edge of it carefully. And that way, again, just so the grease doesn't get transferred from my fingers onto the plate. But I've got my corners cut. Let's get those little sharp metal things, and those can go in we have a sharp can here on campus, so they can go in there, and we'll go from there. So I got my corners rounded, and like I said, I want to use paper towels, not a rag. I have found that the fabric rags will sometimes scratch the plates because it's just a little coarse. So none of our shop rags would be good for this. But again, paper towels, Viva or the blue shop towels. So I'll get a couple pieces off. And I want to go ahead and fold that a couple times, a couple thicknesses of it. And then I'll shift over to the sink to actually wash the plate with the sink, or in the sink. All right, you guys, so I'm ready to counter etch my plate. I could do this on just like a stack of newsprint, maybe a couple sheets thick, so that the water and stuff doesn't get everywhere if I'm doing this at home. And again, you can just do it with hot water. The hotter the better. Just microwave a measuring cup of water until it's, you know, as hot as you can stand to touch. Obviously don't scald or burn yourself, so be careful with the temperature, but as hot as you can stand is ideal. Doing it at school, I'm going to use a little bit of citric acid in my hot water. So I have a measuring cup that's been marked with 10 ounces counter etch right there. And then we have the citric acid container that actually has the ingredients or the instructions for a stone counter etch, which is the same solution as the deoxidizing solution that we're trying to make right now for the plate. So it's a 1/4 teaspoon mixed into 10 ounces or a cup and a quarter of hot water. Another thing I want to have ready is obviously I want to have my measuring cup, measuring spoons, and so all of these are on the shelves right next to the graining sink, which is where I'm set up working right now. So that should all be, if you're standing at the graining sink, everything you're using here should be within eyesight, you know, or eye line of you as you're standing here ready to do it. You should be able to find it pretty easily. I also want to have 3 different pads of paper towels ready. So these are just folded sheets. You can also use makeup remover pads, work really well for this as well. Just don't have any here in front of me right now. Sometimes there are some in the shop. So I'm going to mix my counter etch solution. I'm going to apply it to the plate. I'm going to agitate it. I'll show you guys that these pads of paper towels will turn gray because that's pulling off the oxidation. And then I will rinse the plate. I can rinse the plate in cold or hot water, doesn't matter. But once I rinse the plate, I'll add a little bit more of the counter etch to it, and I'll agitate it with my second folded up paper towel. Do that for a minute, rinse it, move on to my third paper towel, adding more counter etch. So each time I'm adding solution to the plate from my measuring cup, I'm just adding like a third of what's in there. You don't want to pour the whole thing out and then have to mix a new batch. This should be more than enough counter etch solution for a plate this size. And yeah, so I'm going to switch into time lapse and do that, go through those steps quickly. So each time I put the counter etch on the plate, I'm going to agitate it for a minute, rinse it, minute, rinse it, minute, rinse it. And you don't necessarily have to have a timer set up. Doesn't need to be exactly a minute, just about a minute. I usually count like 60 Mississippis in my head, and that's enough of a minute to have it work right. Guys, so after that third pass of the deoxidizing hot water and citric acid combination, I rinsed it off, and I want to make sure that I let the plate drain, get the water to kind of run off there as much as you can, and then I'm actually going to blot it with paper towels until it's almost completely dry, and then I'm going to fan it dry, completely dry. Like I mentioned earlier, we want it to dry immediately so that we don't leave any mineral deposits from the water on there, as well as letting it oxidize as moisture on it mixes with the air. Even though I've deoxidized it and it's nice and clean and ready to draw on, it needs to be dry for me to draw on it. And so I need it to dry immediately so it doesn't build up a new layer of oxidation. One thing about handling it while it's wet, there's a barrier between the grease of my fingers and the plate. If it was dry, I would want to be a lot more careful about handling it. But since it's wet, that's going to protect the plate from absorbing any oils from my hands. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and dry it off and fan it dry. The fan, we have 2 litho fans that are shaped sort of like this. So I'm going to hold it by the handle, and you just swing it around to dry it. And that's how it works. Sounds a little bit like some geese flying overhead. All right, so I'm going to switch it into time lapse and blot it and then fan it dry.